Hello friends, welcome to part 7 of our Python series. In this section, we'll talk about control flow loops. So there are basically two types of loop in Python, for and while loop. So we'll talk about them. And this is the outline of what we are planning to cover in this video. So we'll do a quick introduction of loops, what they are and when do you need to use loops. Then we'll talk about for loops, when to use for loops, and then we'll understand it with some examples. And then we'll do the same exercise with the while loop. And then we'll talk about loop control statements, how you come out of a loop, or you can take some other steps, some other letters you can put in between the loops. We'll talk about them. And then we will take some examples of nested loop. So there can be a loop within a loop, and we'll understand what are the use cases of having nested loops. And then we'll understand it with some real life examples. So we'll try to do some sample program around real life. And then in the last section, we will test your knowledge. So why do we need to use loops? Loops allows us to execute a block of code multiple times. This is useful when we want to repeat an action without rewriting the code, right? So you need not repeatedly write the same code again and again. And then it automates a lot of tasks like printing, counting, or iterating through a particular, let's say, a list or a array. Then Python provides two main types of loop. For loop is used with sequences like range, strings, and lists. While loop repeats while a condition is true. So you can, based on the condition, you can put a while loop. And once you will look at the example, you will understand it better. So loops in a way are the foundation of automation in programming. So let's go to our Python notebook and we will create some examples and try to understand it better. So let me go to, yeah. So here, let's understand it with a real life example. So for an example, let's say you want to write print hello 5 times, right? So then how you typically do it is you can repeat it manually, of course. So I'll say repeating manually, and then I'll just write a print statement. I'll say print and then hello, right? And then I can maybe write it again, or what I can do is I can manually just say print, right? So we wrote print 5 times, right? So it has printed hello 5 times. So there is a better and a smarter way to do it with help of the loops, right? So next what we will do is let's create a few lines of code. So I'll say using a loop to repeat an action, and this is the more efficient way of doing it, right? So I'll say for I, and this name doesn't matter. It can be I, J, or I can take a random character or a keyword, right? It doesn't matter. So I'll say for I in range, and then I will say 5, right? So range is a function, and when I say range 5, it means all the numbers from 0 to 4. So number 5 will not be counted in that, right? So I'll say for I in range 5, and then I'll say print and hello, right? And then I will hit enter. So this will basically print. Okay, I missed a colon here, right? So this will basically print I from 0 to 5 times. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's it. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So range 5 means 0 to 4. So if I'll just say range and then 5, right? And if I'll execute this code, right, it will say it's a range starting from 0 and going up to 5, but not including 5, right? So this range will stop at 5. And then you can also take another example of range where you can also give the a start number, right? So for an example, 2 comma 5, right? So again, that's a range, but this will start from 2 and it will go up to 4, right? So not up to 5. And let's just change it from 5 to 10, right? So uh, and then what I'll do is I can add the step. So I'll say 2, 10, and then 2, right? So 2 will be the step for it. So you will understand it better uh, with an example. So let me just say for I in range, right? And then I'll put the ranges, let me get 1 to 10 for ease of understanding. And then I'll put colon and I'll hit enter and then I'll say print I, right? So it will print all the numbers starting from 1 to 9, excluding 10, right? So that's how the for loop works. So it will iterate between the range 1 to 9, not including 10. Similarly, we can take another example and then we'll also include steps. So I'll say for I in range and then I'll also include this step. So 1 comma 10, so that defines the range, and then we will give a step value. So step I'll initially say 1 and then I'll say print I, right? And let me hit enter, right? So again, it has printed the same range 1 to 9 and the step size is 1. So if I'll say step size is 2, right? Then it will start adding 2 every time it will print a new number. So for an example, I just change it to 2 and now you can see it showing 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. And this step, right, this can be negative value also. So I'll just show an example of the negative value also. So I'll say countdown from 10 to 1. Okay, and then I'll say for I in range, and in this range function I'll give values of 10. 10 will be our starting point, and then I'll say 0. So it will start from 10 and it will go up to 0. And then the step value I'll say -1, right? And again, I'll say print I. And let me hit enter, right? So it's printing the numbers in the reverse order. So 10, 9, 8, 7, and up to 1, right? Not including 0. So you can also use a for loop to iterate through characters in a string, right? So for an example, I'll say for I in, and then let's just take a string, right? So I'll say Python is awesome, right? And I'll say print, and then I, and I'll hit enter, right? So it will write each letter in a different line, right? So you can see Python is awesome, including spaces, right? So in a string, space also holds a value. So it will include the space also when we print it. So I hope you get an idea of for loop. Now let's cover the while loop, right? So I'll just add a markdown here. Okay, and I'll say the while loop, and then so basically the while loop keeps executing a block of code. Let me just write it. The while loop keeps on executing a block of code until a particular condition is met. So I'll say as long as the condition is true. Right? So let's take an example of while loop. Let me add a code block here, and I'll say print. Let's print numbers from 0 to 4 using while loop. So I'll say print numbers from 0 to 4 using while loop, right? And I'll hit enter, and then let's write the block of code. So I'll say count. This is our variable. I'll say count equal to 0, and then I'll put the while condition while count is less than 5, right? Print count. And then I want to increase count by 1 every time the while loop executes, right? So I'll say count equal to count plus 1, right? And then I'll hit enter. So now it's iterating between numbers 0 to 5, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So each time it went through the loop, it printed a number for us, right? And it didn't printed the last number, but it iterated 5 times 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. And then count equal to count plus 1. We can also use a smarter way to write it. I'll say count plus equal to 1, right? So that is equal to count plus 1, right? So the output will be the same in this scenario, right? Now, one big mistake and one very common mistake when what developers do is they miss to add this condition sometimes, right? So make sure you don't miss this condition of incrementing it, right? Otherwise, it will go in a infinite loop, and infinite loop is a problem, right? We don't want infinite loop in any of our programs, right? So let's just take an example of infinite loop. I'll say hash infinite loop example, right? And I will say x equal to 0. Let's just take a random variable, and then I'll say while x less than 5, right? I'll say print x. Now, ideally, I should increment the value of x on each iteration. But if I skipped it, right? Since x's value is 0, right, and it's less than 5, it will keep on printing it again and again and again. So let's just take a example of this one. So I hit enter, and you can see it went to an infinite loop. So let's use this interrupt option here. So because this infinite loop we want to avoid, right? So make sure that you add proper condition here, right, to increment the count. Otherwise, it will go in a infinite while loop that we don't want, right? And another interesting example of where you can use while loop is, let's say I want to use a while loop to keep asking the user until they provide the correct value. So I'll say using while loop to keep asking the user for input until they provide the correct value, right? And just let's just write our block of code. So I'll say password, and then I'll not give it any value. I'll just say blank, and then now I will create a while loop. So I'll say while password is not equal to, right? So this is a condition that I'm putting. Password is not equal to, and then Python 123. All right, and then I'll say password equal to, and we want user to input the value, right? So I'll say password equal to input, and then enter the password and colon. Okay. And until this condition is met, right, this loop will keep on going. But once this condition is met, right, I want to come out of the loop. So I'll say print, and then it's access granted, right? Now let's try to execute this code, right? So you can see this enter the password prompt has came on the top, and I can enter a value here. So let's put a value. I'll say test. Uh, and hit enter, right? So it's not correct, right? I'm still in the loop. So it's again asking to enter the password. If I'll enter the correct value, Python 123, right? And I'll hit enter. It will say access granted. So this is another interesting example of when you use while loop. So now a typical question that comes into users mind is when to use while loop and when to use for loop, right? So let me just use a markdown, and I'll say um, use for loop when you know how many times to repeat. It's a finite time, right? You have a range or something, right? For an example, if it's a fixed range or list, right? In that scenario, you will use a while loop, and then you will use, sorry, in that example, you will use the for loop, and I'll say use while loop when you want to repeat until a condition is met, right? For an example, it can be user input or any threshold. Okay. Next, we'll learn about control statements. Control statements helps us control loop behavior. So I will let me just complete this markdown, and I'll say control statements. So control statements helps us control loop behavior. So using the control loop behavior using break, continue, and pass. So there are three options for us to control the behavior of the loop, right? So sometimes we need more control inside the loop. For an example, we want to exit the loop early before it ends, right? Or we want to skip some iterations within the loop, or we want to probably put a placeholder for future code, right? So Python provides three control statements for this. Let me say Python provides three control statements for this. Uh, Number one is break. So it will exit the loop immediately. And of course, we'll understand it with some examples. Second is continue. So that will skip the current iteration and move to the next iteration, right? And third one is pass. So pass will do nothing. So it actually doesn't do anything, but it's important. So it's typically used as a placeholder for code that probably you want to put later, right? So let's just try to understand it with some examples, right? So let me remove markdown and let me add a code block here, and I'll say using break. So first we'll take some example of break, and I'll say stop the loop when number equals 3, right? And let's write a some block of code for it. So I'll say for I in range, and then let's take a value of 0 to, let's say, 9, right? For I in a range 9, and then I will say enter if I, and I'll say double equal to, right? So this is comparison operator, right? So we did a session earlier for comparison operator. In case you are not sure about how comparison operators are used, I would highly recommend you refer to that video, and I will leave the link in the description. So I'll say if I equal to 3, then print, and here I'll say breaking at, and I'll put a comma, and I'll put I here, right? And then I'll say break, right? So break is our statement. And then I'll say print, and I'll say current number, and let me enter a comma, and then I'll say I, right? And let's execute this block of code. So it will basically print the numbers from 0 to 2, and it will come out of the loop at 3, right? So you can see it's printing the number each time, 0, and then 1, and then 2, right? But the moment it came to 3, right, it break at 3, right? Because we said if I equals 3, then break this loop, right? So the break statement stops the loop as soon as the condition is met. So in this example, loop exits when I becomes 3, right? So let's take a different example with continuous statement, right? So let me just say using continue to escape current iteration, right? So let's take an example, and we'll use number 3 only, so you will get clarity on this one. So I'll say skip the number 3, right? So again, I'll say for I in range, we'll again use the range function, and I'll say range, let's take a value of 9 again, right? And then I'll say if, and I, again I equal to 3, and then we need to put a colon, and then I'll say continue, right? And let me just see print, and current number colon comma I, right? So it will basically skip the number 3. So you can see it's printing all the numbers 0, 1, 2, and then 3 is missing, right? So then there is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So if you want to skip a particular iteration, right, you will use continue there. Okay. Now let's take our example of third option that we have, pass, right? So we'll take an example of pass, and I'll say example where pass is used as a placeholder, right? So I'll say for I in range, and again I'll say 9 if I equal to let's say if I equal to, and I'll say 5, right? Um, and I'll say if I equal to 5, and then um, I'll say pass, right? So pass is our placeholder or future code, right? Placeholder for future code. Okay, and then I'll say okay, so just to get us a better idea, right, that pass has happened, I'll say print, and then I'll say this is a placeholder, right? And then I'll come out of the loop and I'll print, let's see, processing I, right? So this is our third uh, option, that is pass. So here, right, you can see it has print all the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, right? It will print only 0 to 8. And then after 4, right, at the fifth iteration, it first said that this is a placeholder, right, before going to the next iteration, right? So at the fifth place, after the fifth iteration, right, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 5 iterations till here, and then it will say this is a placeholder, and this then it will go to the next iteration, right? So that's how you use these loop control statements of break, continue, and pass. If you still have any doubt or you want clarification about any example that we have used so far, then you can just post in the comment section and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, so just to quickly summarize, you will use break to exit the loop early based on a condition. You will use continue to skip the rest of the loop body for the current iteration. And you will use pass when you need a syntactically valid block with no action, right? So next, let's go to some real life examples. So I'll just put a markdown and I'll say real life examples. I mean, they're not actually real life examples, but they are interesting examples that will give you a lot of clarity on when and how you will use it, right? So I will say, let's take first example of uh, loops, right? So I'll say uh, print uh, right angled triangle pattern using asterisk. Okay. And again, I'll say for I in range. Oh, sorry, we are in the markdown. So let me just delete the markdown and let's go to code. And I'll say for I in range. And I'll give value 1 to 5. Or let's again take the value of 1 to 9. And then I'll say for J. So this is the loop inside a loop, right? So we can use loops inside the loops, which are extremely useful in multiple situations. So we are using two loops in this example. First is the outer loop that is using I, and then there is a inner loop. So I'll say for J in range, and then in this range function, I'll use I here, right? So, and I'll use print statement here, print, and then star, and then I'll say end equal to, and then I'll say blank, right? So this end, right, it'll basically helps us not move to next line unless this printing is completed, right? And then I'll come out of this loop, sorry, for j in range, and then yeah, this should be inside this one. Okay, for j in range I here, and then I'll just come out of it, and then I'll say print. So it will basically print a new line after each row, right? So let's just execute this code of block, right? So you can see a uh, right angle triangle pattern, right? First row, it has printed one asterisk, second, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Because our range is 1 to 8, right? 9 is the stop range, right? So it will go from 1 to 8. right? So in outer loop, right, we are defining how many rows has to be there, and in the inner loop we are defining how many asterisk, how many stars should be in each row. So this is an example of nested loop. So I'll just add nested loop here, and I what I'll do is I'll just make some cosmetic changes in this Python notebook file, and then I'll upload it to GitHub, and I'll leave a link in the description so you can have it for your reference if you want to refer it later on, right? Next, let's just take some other real life examples of loop. So that will help you connect loop logic to real world scenarios. So let's take our first example. So let's say we want to print the multiplication table for a given number, right? And here I can enter a number. I'll say num equal to 5, and then I'll say print, and we'll use f string literal here to have some our output in a better way. So I'll say f string literal, and then I'll say uh, multiplication table for, and then I'll put the curly bracket, and I'll say num, and then I'll put a colon here, right? Sorry, and then let's go to the next row. Let me just take a gap here, and I'll say for I in range, and our range should be 1 to 10, right? So I'll say 1, 11, right? Because 11 is the stop range, which means it will stop at 11 minus 1, that is 10, right? So I'll say for I in range 1 to 11, print, and then again use some f string literal. So I'll say f, and then um, I'll use curly bracket, and I'll say num, and I'll use x here, num into, and here I'll say I, right? So there will be multiple iterations, and it will multiply each iteration here, and then I'll say equal to, and then again I'll use curly bracket, and I'll say num star I, right? So let me execute this here, and you can see that we have got a multiplication table for 5, right? So for, and I'll see, just give it a space to make it look a bit better. Multiplication table for 5. So it's iterating through the loop. First time 5 into 1, that is 5. Next time 5 into 2 equal to 10. And then third time 5 into 3 equal to 15, and so on, right? So this is where you can use loops, right? Let's take another example. We'll say we want to count the number of vowels in a string, right? So let's take another example, and I'll say count number of vowels in a string. And I hope you know what is vowels. So A, E, I, O, U are the vowels. So let's say text equal to, and I'll put some string values. I'll say loops are powerful in Python, right? And let me add a exclamation here, and then I'll give the value of vowels, right? So vowels, and again I'll put another string that will say the value of vowel is A, E, I, O, U. But along with that, we also want capital A, E, I, O, U, because they will also be counted as vowels. So I'll also put the capital letters A, E, I, O, U, right? So we put small and capital A, E, I, O, U as vowels, and then I'll say count equal to 0, and then we'll create our loop. So I'll say for char in text And then again, we'll use nested loop, right? So I'll say if char in vowels, then count plus equal to 1, right? So it's adding the count here by 1. And then I'll say, let's come out of this loop. And then I'll say print. And again, let's use some f string literals. I'll say f. And then I'll say number of vowels. And then here I'll say count. Okay, and let's just execute this, right? So you can see it's telling number of vowels is 9. So let's just revalidate if the number is correct. So 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, right? We have 9 vowels here, right? So it's a simple program. Just try to do it yourself and then you will be able to understand it better, right? Let's take one more example maybe here. So what we'll do is we will reverse a string using a loop, right? So I'll say text equal to Python, right? And then I'll use another variable. I'll say reverse text equal to, and let's not give it any value to start with. And then I'll use the loop for char in text, and I'll say reversed underscore text equal to char plus reversed text, right? And then I'll say, let's come out of the loop, and then I'll say print uh, reversed string colon and then comma, and here will be our reversed text. All right, so we are basically appending each letter one by one. We are not appending actually, but we are prepending the letter, right? So let me just put a comment here for clarity. We are not appending the character to the end, rather we are prepending the character, right? So that is what is happening. Now let's try to execute it and see what is our outcome, right? So you can see that it has basically reversed the string. It's starting from N and it's going till capital P, right? So this is an example on how you can reverse a string using loop, right? So I hope you got a good idea around what loops are, what are the loop control statements and how to use them. So now I have a small quiz to test your knowledge towards the end. So let's go to the quiz. First question is you have to predict the output. What will be the output of following code? So here I am saying for I in range to 10 with a step value of 3 and then print I and equal to and then I'm just uh, hitting enter, right? So what will be the outcome of this one? So I would suggest you test it in your VS Code and put the output in the comment section, and whoever will put the right action right answer, I will give a star to their comments, a heart basically. Let's go to question number 2. This is around while loop logic. So what is the value of x after the following loop finishes? So x equal to 0 while x is less than 3 and then x plus equal to 1, and you can see the option. So just put the right option in the comment section, whether it will be A, B, C, or it will go in a infinite loop. Now let's go to question 3. So what it's around nested loop count, how many times it will print hello in this example, right? For I in range 2, for j in range 3, and I'll say print hello. So how many times it will print hello? Will it be 2, 3, 5 or 6? Please put the right answer in the comment section. Question number 4 is skipping iteration. So what does the following code will print? If I'll say for I in range 5, if I is equal to 2, then continue and then print I. So you have 4 options here. Put the right option in the comment box. And question number 5 is looping over a string. What is the output of the following code? So if I'll say text equal to AI, for I in text, for j in range 2, print I and then end, right? So what it will give as a output, option number A, B, C and D. And friends, before you leave this video, I would request you to please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and also press the bell icon so you will get an alert when I upload a new video. So thanks again for joining us today.